Hey, how's it going and welcome to another video. I hope you're all having a good Danganronpa week. So, a big passion of mine is lost media, like unused content, beta elements in video games. I just think that stuff is super fascinating. Sometimes, for me at least, like what gets left out of a video game ends up being more interesting than the game itself. I think it's just human nature to wonder what could have been and kinda want to see what we're not supposed to see, you know? And a good example of that is DISTRUST, the prototype for Danganronpa. I think it's a really fascinating look into the initial concept for what would ultimately become Danganronpa. And it's always neat to see what changed and what more or less stayed the same. The information in this video comes from the Danganronpa wiki, Unseen64, and an interview with series creator Kazutaka Kodaka on Polygon. So all the credit really does go to those websites. I'm just kind of parsing through what we have about Distrust and discussing it. So without further ado, let's get into it. The story of Distrust begins in 2007 with Kazutaka Kodaka, an employee of the game company Spike, which became Spike Chunsoft in 2012. Kodaka had proposed an idea to the man who would ultimately become producer for the Danganronpa series, Yoshinori Terasawa. Kodaka wanted to create something original, as at the time Spike was primarily making sequels or adaptations of already existing properties. The general outline of the idea was 15 boys and girls killing period, or our 7-day survival war. Also, the concept of a psychopop high school detective mystery was thrown around. The initial concept seemed pretty solidified in Kodaka's head. A visual novel involving high school students, survival, murder, and mystery solving. However, the devil truly is in the details, and the original vision for Distrust would have been much darker than the Danganronpa it turned into. For example, there would have been red blood instead of the now iconic pink blood, and based on the information we have, it would have overall been a vastly more no-nonsense kind of game. From the Polygon article with Kodaka, Distrust was the original image of the game, obviously, and it was Psychoshock. So essentially, for us, that would be something like just straight-up gruesome horror. However, when we were thinking about whether or not to do it, we felt that the audience for that was really small. Even in a place like America, the audience would still be small, but because the population's bigger, it might sell more. It seems as though the shift from Distrust's very dark tone to Danganronpa's more lighthearted one came from both the development team and pressure put on them from Spike's higher-ups. First of all, there were concerns relating to the game's Sero rating, which is basically the Japanese equivalent of the ESRB. Such a gruesome game would almost certainly receive a higher rating, limiting the customer base which it could be sold to. Second, a game like Distrust would have probably only appealed to a very specific niche, which is something Spike had first-hand experience with. 999 was also published by Spike, and didn't do so well with the Japanese audience, but did manage to find a cult status in the United States. Another quote from Kodaka reads, "But at the end of the day, things of that nature that are that gruesome and that dark, the audience was too small for us to really want to pursue that to its end." Although sales and rating concerns certainly played a factor, it seems Kodaka simply wasn't happy with where his own vision was going. The approach of brutality for the sake of brutality just didn't seem to sit right with him. For example, look at this one screenshot featuring a decapitated character who had been executed by a guillotine. Another quote from Kodaka reads, "It's like the character loses his essence by doing that. Even though a character might die during the events of the game, provided they remain whole, I feel that they'll remain whole in the person's memory, and that character will still be cute or memorable or liked by the player. But if I were to actually have them be dismembered, the character would lose that sense of their essence, and the ability to remain within the player's imagination and memory. Just writing things that are cruel or gruesome or violent, it ends there. There's nothing really interesting about that." It seems as if it was clear to Kodaka that Distrust, as it was, just wasn't the game he wanted to make. It was violent, but lacked a certain something. It appealed to a specific audience, but not a broad enough one. Thus, Distrust would be cancelled and reworked into Danganronpa. Despite being cancelled, there's a pretty decent wealth of screenshots and beta designs from Distrust that we can examine and figure out more about what this game would have been like. Starting with the characters. The characters of Distrust are an interesting case, since you can absolutely see the idea of many of these characters have been nailed down, but their final designs and sometimes their names aren't. Starting with Naegi, who didn't have a proper name at this point and simply went by Protagonist, the resemblance to his final version is clear to see. Sometimes. The designs of the Distrust characters clearly went through a lot of work, as we can see their appearances change throughout the various screenshots we have available. For example, in this image showing the lineup, we see a Naegi who is very close to his final appearance, without his precious ahuge. In others, we see a Naegi who looks a bit different, having hair that falls in a different way, and he has a bit of a different face. Byakuya has 2 appearances, one with his glasses and one without. Sakura is one of the characters with a pretty consistent design. At first I couldn't even tell if this version was female or not, but in this image you can clearly see the skirt, and it seems as though this version would have been even more masculine. Somehow. Leon is an interesting case as he appears quite prominently, although in this version he was named Kazuo Masuzaki. In fact, one of the only videos we have for Distrust is his execution, which is more or less the exact same as his Danganronpa execution. We can also see him here as the center of attention in what I assume is a trial, this image of him and Beta Sayaka holding guns, and this screenshot of them in shock upon seeing some blood. He also shows up in this picture getting cut up by Beta Sayaka with a big knife. Either way, Leon was most definitely on the forefront of the developers' minds, and it seems very likely his status as the first killer was an idea that survived through a very lengthy development period. Asahina looks quite different from her final version, having pale skin and a face that reminds me a lot of Sayaka's. Speaking of Sayaka, her and Beta Leon seem to have been the duo most frequently used to show the concept of distrust, as pretty much every Leon screenshot also includes Sayaka, so her unfortunate connection to him seems to have always been there. Hifumi was also slightly more gross than his Danganronpa counterpart. He seems to just be profusely sweating all the time. He also used to be called Yuji Ando. Kyoko had vibrant green hair, and used to have the name Gyaru Kirigiri. Chihiro looked fairly different with the bowl cut. Toko is an interesting one. She has this one design which is pretty reminiscent of her final appearance, and then there's this. I think this design is just fucking splendid. Every time I see it, it makes me crack a smile. Hagakure looks quite similar, but at one point had this orange hair. Celestia used to be known as S. Rudenberg, and at one point was missing her signature hairdo. Mondo used to have slick back hair. Ishimaru was once called Kiyotaka Ishiru. Finally, Junko did give off a similar sort of gal vibe, but she had this disgusting booger yellow hair. The final character we're going to have a look at is Distrust Monokuma, who originally went by the name Phantom. And in a way, I feel as if he's kind of the ultimate reflection of Distrust's design philosophy, compared to Danganronpa's. It's a lot more gruesome than the final Monokuma. He's a human split down the middle with one side showing his guts. He's kind of gross, and I'm certainly not Kodaka, but I kind of feel like we're on the same wavelength about this guy. He's neat, yeah, he's gross, but it's missing a certain magic, a certain sauce. And likewise, I feel as though Distrust would have been kind of the same way. It would have been cool, but it would have lacked that Danganronpa sauce. Distrust wasn't just a cool title, it was meant to be an entire mechanic of the game. Throughout the course of the game, you would be able to build up trust with certain characters, and likewise, you could also make other characters distrust you. This next tidbit is an area where Distrust may have stretched itself a bit too thin. The ability to influence the way characters act during trials. The distrust system also would have allowed for branching pathways and alternate endings. It also seems as though the trust meter would have changed which characters end up getting killed. Although undoubtedly a cool concept, I have my doubts about the functionality of such an open-ended system. Like, imagine for a second the amount of variables involved in writing something like that. Imagine a Danganronpa where every single playthrough, every trial is a bit different, where you can end up with different survivors, different killers. It's a cool idea for sure, but it would have required a lot of writing and accounting for different possibilities. A neat idea for sure, but the more practical, one-way through approach allows for a much more concise single story. Distrust is an absolutely fascinating look into what ultimately turned into Danganronpa, but it's also a really cool sort of time capsule in a way. The concept, setting, and the general idea of the characters are all there, but in the minds of the creators it was missing something. The style just wasn't quite what they were wanting, it was lacking substance. And sometimes in life you just gotta turn the blood pink. Sometimes you gotta turn this guy into this guy. One last cutesy little reference to Distrust that's included in Danganronpa is the song Distrust. It's a clear homage as the title of the game Distrust and the song's title are both capitalized. It's a cute little reference to what could have been. Although I would have absolutely loved to see a proper working Distrust prototype if such a thing even exists. The information we do have is plenty enough to have a wide view at Danganronpa's cancelled older brother. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.